The Chronicles of Uzaya, a novel by Robert Ray. This audiobook is narrated by Silas Grim, an AI voice built from scratch. No human voice was used in the recording of this audio. Chapter 22. The Theft. Midnight. The silver spire rose from the cliff itself, its stone seamless with the rock around it, silver caps catching starlight along its peak. Its windows were dark, except for the second floor, where Vandrian's lamp still burned. The night did not stir, yet something moved within it. At the bottom of the cliffs below the spire, where giant boulders broke the surf, two shapes began their ascent, moving with methodical precision. Small, hairless, glowing eyes sunk deep in leathery, wrinkled faces. Each wore dark wrappings close to the skin, short blades strapped flat across their backs. As they neared the top, one of them whispered a word, harsh and guttural. His form blurred, like staring at something through rippling water. His companion did the same. They crested the cliff near the stair path, moving slowly across the open ground towards the spire's foundation. From above, atop the cliff summit, movement against the stars. A massive shape descended the spire's face. It moved without sound. A vertical spine of black glass ceramic carried the weight of the form, smooth and uninterrupted, pressed close to the cliff face. 6 limbs extended from it at staggered heights, thick as a man's arm, moving with measured control. Beneath translucent skin, rigid supports traced the spine and limbs in precise lines, reinforcement placed where structure mattered and flesh did not. At the top of the spine, a drow upper torso was mounted, but elongated, drawn upward into a taller, narrower proportion. Arms reached farther than expected, ending in a blossom of clawed fingers. Its face was obsidian dark and smooth, white hair cascading around it. The eyes did not glow. They gathered light, wide and depthless, returning none of it. Above the mage's window, the arachne locked itself into the stone, holding positions no living climber could maintain. Before the spire, a lone figure appeared. She walked confidently forward toward the stone door at the front, but she did not knock. The air gathered beneath her, her hair tossed, as if blown by winds that were not present. Slowly she began to rise, toward Vandrian's bedroom window, where the arachne waited above. As she ascended, the two climbers resolved out of nothing before the spire's front door. They bowed their heads, not to her, but to the structure itself, in a gesture that resembled prayer. Gredlings. They saw the spire differently. Not its shape, but its truth. Every stone, every ward. Able to visualize both magic and the present reality as overlapping layers, aligned and misaligned throughout the structure. With practiced focus, they read the building as one might read a map. One of them pointed at the lock and made a soft clicking sound. If magic were visible, it would have looked like decay. The layered wards around the door didn't break. They unraveled. Bindings dissolved as their shared structure was quietly erased. Metal answered next. Tumblers shifted. Internal mechanisms disengaged in perfect unison. A final, satisfying clank echoed from within. The door swung open. The Gredlings stepped in, listening, seeing with senses that had nothing to do with light. The magic-woven traps Vandrian had placed were layered. Even the Gredlings considered the work impressive. 7 distinct barriers lay between the threshold and the sentinel stone they were after. It sang to them in distant, unmistakable notes. The first barrier hummed at a frequency just below hearing, resonance designed to unmake minds. The Gredlings tilted their heads in unison, then stepped through it like smoke. The magic recognized only shapes. They had learned to fold themselves into hidden places that existed between definitions. The second layer tasted of copper and sweat, a sympathetic drowning meant to flood the lungs. But they breathed stone and shadow. They moved forward, threading through the remaining barriers with practiced efficiency. Each trap was identified, respected, and bypassed. The Sentinel Stone's song grew clearer with every barrier crossed. They had never doubted. They would retrieve that which they were commanded. Clank. Vandrian jerked awake. He'd been examining the Sentinel Stone in the vault for hours before exhaustion drove him to bed. Sleep had taken him quickly. The artifact vault's protective matrix had whispered constantly for 3 years. A presence at the edge of hearing, a reassuring murmur of ancient magic doing its work. The vault was not whispering. Its absence was deafening. He sat up, heart already racing. His hand moved through practiced gestures, his lips whispering an incantation as his feet found the ground beside the bed. Translucent energy coalesced over his skin, tracing faint patterns in the darkness. Before he could finish pulling on his left boot, the room came apart. Stone and timber tore free at the window. The wall around it ripped outward, taking the frame with it, and leaving the chamber open to the night. Vandrian sat on the edge of the bed, still bent over his boots. The arachne crashed through the roof. Stone and slate rained down as it forced its way into the room. Vandrian made for the door, but it blocked him, slamming a thick, chitinous leg across his path. He had nowhere to go. The priestess floated in midair where the wall had been. Vandrian's hands snapped up to draw out the magic, words already forming on his lips. Too late. Sticky white strands erupted from gaps beneath its flesh-covered frame. They crossed the space in a blink, striking him and driving him back against the wall as webbing cinched tight around his body. Before breath could leave his mouth, the arachne was upon him, fingers closing around his throat, overlapping and stacking, leaving no place for air. The priestess's robes settled around her as her feet touched the floor. Staff planted, violet energy racing along its length. She studied Vandrian as he gasped for breath, her face expressionless, then spoke in drow. Not to him, to the arachne. Zalathan. The arachne eased its hold. Downstairs, the Gredlings were nearly finished. Locks clicked, poisons neutralized, wards disabled. The Sentinel Stone lay unprotected. They lifted it from its inner cradle, placed it in a bag it shouldn't have fit in, then dropped out of sight with a blink and a shimmer. A loud click reverberated downstairs, from nowhere. Then another. Finished, the Gredlings left the way they'd come. The priestess stood before Vandrian. He was still held, webbing binding him in place, the arachne's leg at his throat. "The stone," she said. A familiar click echoed up the stairwell from below. The priestess's expression didn't change, but something in her posture relaxed. "Ah," she said, "then it is done." She raised her staff and began to speak, an old tongue even Vandrian did not recognize. The shimmer along the staff intensified. A violet circle formed around him. Symbols ignited in the air, inscribing themselves as they turned. Geometric, perfect, terrible. They converged. His eyes widened despite himself. The casting took time. Each second refused to pass. Most spells were instantaneous, words and gestures flowing into immediate effect. But some were built, layer upon layer. The runes circled him in orbital paths, each inscribing itself in the air. Vandrian's training identified the pattern. He recognized the steps. Dimensional banishment. He'd read about it. Twice. Once in a theoretical treatise on planar magic, once in a warning about pre-sundering sorcery. It was considered a mythic spell. Many doubted it truly existed. It was said it took minutes to cast, but centuries to undo. The sort of magic reserved for enemies who couldn't be killed, but had to be removed. His mind raced through possible countermeasures. Disruption, anti-magic, planar anchor. The list was academic, theoretical. Every counter required free hands and spoken words, and things he couldn't possibly obtain. The runes completed their rotation, locking in place around him. The temperature dropped. He watched as frost crystallized around him, on the walls, the floor, the bed beside him. Then he felt it take hold. Not pain, bifurcation. The sensation of being in two places at once, his bedroom and somewhere else. The arachne released him. The webbing slackened. His bedroom drifted away. He stood in a corridor. Stone walls extended in both directions, gray and featureless, lit by sourceless illumination that made no shadows. The air smelled of nothing. No dust, no moisture, no scent of stone or age or occupancy. Vandrian's ears rang with the absence of sound. No wind, no settling stone, no ambient noise of a living structure. The silence was absolute. He walked forward. 10 steps. 20. The corridor stretched ahead in kind, without variation. Identical passages branched off at regular intervals, extending into distances his eyes could not resolve. He turned left at the first junction, walked 50 paces, turned right, walked again. The pattern held. Perfect sameness. No landmarks, no where, no indication anyone had ever been here. His breath quickened. He forced himself to stop. Think. He'd read the warnings. The treatise had been specific. Victims of dimensional banishment were sealed in recursive space. Mathematically infinite. Self-referential. Walking forward brought you back to your starting point through corridors that felt linear but weren't. Every path led nowhere. Every direction was the same direction. The architecture was the trap. He touched the wall. Cold stone, solid, real. His fingers came away clean, no grit. The light here had no source. It simply was. Enough to see by, but not enough to cast shadow. He tried magic, words of power, precision gestures. The spell guttered, unable to form. The corridor offered no echo when he spoke the words. Vandrian walked faster. Left, right, straight, trying to map it, trying to find variation, anything. A crack in the wall, a change in the light, a passage that differed from the others. Nothing. His heart hammered. He slowed and forced himself to breathe. The mathematics were elegant. The recursion folded on itself so completely that distance became meaningless. Time felt wrong. How long had he been walking? Minutes? Hours? His body reported exhaustion, but his mind couldn't trust it. He might have been here days and experienced minutes, or the reverse. There would be no rescue, no clever escape, no counterspell. The priestess had finished the casting. The seal was complete. forever. The understanding settled into him with physical weight. This stone, this silence, this empty, perfect geometry. Vandrian's composure unraveled all at once. The scream came from somewhere deep and primal. Rage, grief, fear, all together in one horrible sound. His body shook in the effort. The corridor accepted the scream and returned it, but not as echo. The sound came back different, multiple voices overlapping his own, some older, some younger, not his. The pain from other ages, other victims. The corridor remembering every tortured sound it had ever consumed and returning all of them at once. The cacophony lasted seconds. Then silence reasserted. Vandrian knelt in the corridor, throat raw, hands shaking. Far away, in a bedroom that no longer connected to his reality, the priestess lowered her staff. "Contained," she said, turning to leave. The arachne was already climbing back out through the roof. 60 seconds, and the spire was empty. The sentinel stone was returned. Vandrian was gone. Only silence remained. Morning light found the spire violated. The upper floor was completely destroyed, debris scattered unevenly across the front grounds. When the city watch arrived and saw what had happened, they called for the Crucible to send professionals to investigate. The mages came, studied the artifact vault, found the wards inverted, disabled by something that understood them better than whoever had cast them. Vandrian was gone. No body, no blood, just absence. The doors were sealed, and the silver spire placed under quarantine. Chapter 23. The Stone Garden. Uzaya left at first light. He prepared quickly. Water flask, rope, hook, glowstone. He stashed the sketches in his coat pocket and locked the shop behind him. The quarter was waking. Water lapped at doorways. A fishmonger cursed somewhere down the block, bailing out his stall. Gulls circled overhead, crying for scraps. Mist followed him, wisping around his boots and the folds of his coat. The quarter gave way to the sunken mid-districts nearer the coast, where flooding was seasonal, predictable, and frequent. Buildings there had surrendered decades ago, their foundations too rotted to bear weight. Streets ended in collapsed structures or water-filled dead ends. Shops and warehouses remained only as rotting husks, their original purpose no longer legible. Leesenhold, despite appearances, had never truly been a castle. Among the Veilguard, it was called an amplification hub, a site where harmonic forces were focused and directed, tuned to operate at scale. The ruins, including the infamous Leaning Watchtower, were incidental. What mattered lay below. The resonance orb hung in its chamber, suspended over converging ley lines. When it functioned, the world dimmed and the spiral retreated. With the advent of the Storm Kings, the systems all eventually failed. No record survived. Now, Leesenhold is generally avoided. Except by Abe, Uzaya thought, pulling his leg up and out of the muck. As he tracked across the soggy plateau, the ground fought him at every step. Mud clung to his boots, releasing after some effort, and a wet, defiant, sucking sound. Shallow water pooled between ridges of slick earth, cold seeping through his soles as he moved. Halfway across, he noticed the statues. Not many, but impossible to miss. They were scattered across the flats, nearly buried, or tilting where the ground had given way beneath their weight. The tides had worked them for generations, sanding most features down to suggestion. Others endured with disturbing clarity. Uzaya's pace slowed as the realization hit. Petrified. Mud dragged at his boots as he pressed on. Leesenhold rose out of the flats in broken tiers of stone, its frontage dominating the shoreline. The structure crowned a low, rocky hill that lifted it above the tidal reach, though centuries of settling had drawn its foundations closer to the water. Sections of the structure had slumped or collapsed over time, their lower courses exposed where tide and erosion had stripped the ground away. What remained leaned inward on itself, walls fractured and misaligned, as if the structure had been slowly sinking for generations. Abe's sketch guided him along the eastern side, where the flats met the castle wall. The map was precise. Coordinates, tide windows, structural markers. The old scavenger knew his craft. Uzaya found the broken lantern first. Shattered glass lay among the remains of his camp. He crouched, brushed mud from the bent brass housing. The seams were hand-cut, slightly uneven, reinforced where no reinforcement was needed. Abe's work. Distinctive. The archway crumbled in the uphill face of the castle wall, set 10 feet above the mudflats. Beyond it, a shadowed stair descended into the structure's foundations. The stair dropped in tight angles, turning back on itself as it sank. The wall pressed so close that his shoulder struck stone at every corner. Dust shifted underfoot. Air from below rose cold and steady. With each turn, the noise of the surface receded until even the wind was gone. The stair opened onto a final landing, the floor thick with stone dust and fragments fallen from above. Beyond it, a short hallway led into a domed chamber of blackstone. The floor was etched with broad circular patterns, mirrored imperfectly in the ceiling overhead. Uzaya remembered the spiral beneath the church at Holford. It was similar. Along the walls, shallow channels had been cut and filled with a dull, reflective metal. The veins spread and crossed, branching and intersecting with measured precision. At the center of the chamber, suspended within a corroded metal frame, was the resonance orb. It was massive, 9 feet in diameter, a perfect sphere covered with overlapping scales, hand-sized, slightly curved, and textured with intricate ridges and bumps. Some were missing, leaving gaps in the surface, revealing a rough, gray metal beneath. The frame was old and heavy. The mechanisms that once controlled the orb's position were rusted solid, seized in place, locking the sphere where it hung. He moved closer. As he rounded the frame, a figure came into view at the base of the orb. A statue of Abe stood there. One hand was extended toward the frame, fingers hovering just short of the surface. Tools lay at his feet: chisel, small pry bar, hammer. His expression was one of shock, eyes wide, mouth gaping, as if he was about to speak. Uzaya stepped towards him. Every feature was intact, every detail preserved in stone. Even the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, earned through decades of squinting at things, were perfectly captured. Uzaya took it in. His pack. He opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in cloth, a single lattice scale from the orb, complete and unbroken. Uzaya shifted his stance, aligning himself beside Abe. Abe's petrified arm was raised only inches from the frame. He raised his own beside it. For a moment, their postures matched. Uzaya pressed his palm to the orb's surface. The pendant warmed sharply. The eye forced its way through. A glistening, fleshy shape pulled itself out of the green gem at the heart of the pendant. A lidless eye, fringed with tiny tendril legs. It did not float so much as extend, tethered to the pendant by a distortion in the air. It had always been there, watching. Vertigo hit as his vision doubled. What the eye saw, he saw. What it knew, he knew. There was no separation. The link was locked. Uzaya felt his body stiffen. Knowledge arrived all at once. Not images, not words. Certainty. The Medusa. A thought surfaced, unbidden. What is she? The answer came in a vision. The vision presented Leisenhold as it had once been. Not a singular history, but two overlaid. The first layer was Leisenhold 4,000 years ago. The resonance chamber thrummed with purpose. At its center, the orb crawled with traces of light, hundreds of harmonic scales precisely arrayed, slowly turning within its frame. The orb drew power from the ley line junction deep below, each scale necessary, harmonics layered together in impossibly complex patterns, all resolved into deliberate function. Entropy pushed upward. The field pressed down. Order held through focus and will. Above, sunlight was reduced, filtered through the shadow field. It spread from the pyramid to distant node points, muting the sun's strength and washing the world in a dim, moonlit pall. Enough light to see, not enough to harm those who have only known darkness. But it was the beginning of the end for the drow who ruled both Tharn Eskar and the dark realm below. The Storm King Faragoth was leading an uprising that had already struck a death blow to the drow technology. The systems were failing, and so with it was the age of the Ancient One. Within the chamber, a figure toiled. The Keeper. Hands busy adjusting the scales, tuning frequencies, struggling to maintain the system as the nodal network failed. Panic never stopped his work. Bound by oath, he continued toward a solution, even as the orb faltered and sunlight bled through the shadow field for the first time in millennia. When the orb finally failed, the Keeper did not. The second layer of the vision, simultaneous and overlaid, was Leisenhold 173 years ago. A group of humans entered the chamber below, clerics and an ensemble of guards. They did not understand what they had found. They built the castle over the ancient Veilguard foundations, stone atop stone. Later, a woman, Ilvare. She wore the robes of the Concord, a scholar's posture, but a wizard of some standing, the sort who did not revisit conclusions once drawn. She had studied the orb for years, long inert in its rusted frame. She considered it an artifact, something to be cataloged and decoded. She believed she understood it. The ritual of the orb followed, convened by the council and wholly under her direction. Their intent was containment, to redirect any remaining energies into the sealed holding chambers they had prepared in the old levels below. The plan was to then move the entire apparatus to the Crucible Vault for historic preservation. The design was sound. Her understanding was not. Ilvare stood near the orb at the center. The instant she spoke the final word, the surge struck. Spiroforce rushed upward, drawn through the orb through harmonic channels, amplified by technology older than her language. The change was instant. Serpents burst from her scalp, eyes blinded, then reformed with power and new focus. Thoughts fractured, her own life memories draining away, leaving her sense of self empty. Yet her body endured. Something else entered her with the surge. Not knowledge, but compulsion. The Keeper's psyche, its residue, was still bound to the chamber. It insisted its mandate be preserved, and formed that same oath eternally into whatever was left of her mind. The curse settled like chains. Guard Leesenhold, protect the orb. The vision faded. The eye withdrew back into the pendant. Uzaya breathed in as the pendant began to cool again. He set a hand on Abe's petrified shoulder. "I'm sorry, Abe," he said softly, then turned toward the exit. Halfway up the stairs, he heard the sound of moving water. He'd lost track of time. The tide had come in. The terrace where the watchtower stood had subsided centuries ago, below the main structure's elevation. It and the castle's lower grounds were already beginning to flood. The mudflats Uzaya had crossed that morning were gone. In their place, frothing brown water stretched to the mainland, choppy and cold, the current pulling hard toward the open sea. There was no way back. Uzaya looked up at the leaning watchtower, stark against the purple sky. 4 stories tall. A safe place to rest. Climbing wasn't out of the question. The angle made it possible, even with his lack of experience. He waded across the terrace until he reached the tower's base, water to his ankles. The fallen bell lay near, bronze, broken, sunken in the dirt. The stairs up the tower were long choked with rubble and fallen beams. Its outer stonework, however, was rough enough to climb. Uzaya drew the rope from his pack, fixed the hook, and threw. After the 3rd attempt, it caught, wedged between stones near an open window some 20 feet up. He tested the line. Tight. He climbed. Hand over hand, boots finding purchase on the old stone. Once high enough, he used the tower's awkward lean to his advantage, swinging onto the incline and climbing the rest of the way with less effort. At the top, he stepped over the broken railing and into the belfry. The floor was mostly gone. What remained was a narrow stone ledge, barely 5 feet across. Above, the darkening sky showed through gaps in the vaulted roof where the bell had once hung. He leaned against the wall and looked out from the tower. The ruins spread beneath him, the castle, the plateau now impassable, the far-off lights of the drowned quarter. Uzaya set his pack down and tried to find a comfortable place to wait for the tide to recede. The sun slipped beneath the horizon. Uzaya sat with his back against the tower's inner wall. He pulled his cloak tightly around him. The stone held the cold, giving nothing back. The urgency that had carried him this far had gone quiet. He felt his eyes growing heavier by the moment. It wasn't long before he found himself drifting off to sleep. He did not resist it. Uzaya woke to the sound of sloshing water. He craned his neck over the edge of the battlement and peered below. The Medusa stood there. He guessed 8 feet tall. Serpents writhed across her scalp, each moving independently, tasting the air with forked tongues. The sound of their hissing was faint and unnerving. Uzaya knew her name from the vision. "Ilvare," he said softly. She stopped at the base of the tower and looked up, as if she'd heard him. It knew exactly where he was. Uzaya didn't move. There was nowhere to go, just the platform, the drop, and the water below. She stood there, perfectly still. Only the serpents writhed and coiled about her head like a living crown. Her voice entered his mind without permission. Veilguard. A statement. Recognition. When her eyes fixed on him, the sickness came. Pressure built behind his eyes, hard enough to split thought. Then he understood. He was too far, 50 feet at least. Her power couldn't reach him here. Her words violated the distance anyway. I guard. I maintain. I protect. Ancient duty burned into corrupted flesh. It moved closer, water breaking around the scaled length of her body. Leave. It lingered a moment longer. Serpents watched. Hatred coiled. Then she left, gliding back through the water toward the castle and the chambers she had claimed below. Uzaya exhaled, only then realizing he'd been holding his breath. He sat alone in the tower as the darkness deepened. Still hours to go before dawn. Sleep came in fragments, only minutes at a time. Near the deepest point of night, a distant rumble. The tower shuddered. Uzaya jolted awake. Sleep did not find him again. By the time the sky lightened, the tide had receded. The plateau was slick, but crossable. Uzaya climbed down from the tower at once, moving deliberately, every muscle stiff from cold and exhaustion. He crossed the tidal flats as the sun rose, boots sinking into cold silt that would soon be claimed again by the sea. He skirted a fresh sinkhole, wide as a wagon. Far ahead, the outline of the low district rose through the mist. The mud gave way to firm ground as he reached the mainland, continuing up as the streets rose from the water. The drowned quarter was already stirring with life, but when he reached the more populated parts, there was no mistaking it. People were staring. Not the usual wary nod or half glance he was used to either. A woman saw him and drew her child back inside, closing the door. At a nearby stall, a merchant looked up, then bent back over his goods without a word. Two men on a corner stopped talking as he approached. One of them glanced away, then back again, eyes widening. A moment later, the corner was empty. Uzaya tried to dismiss the pattern, but it stayed with him. Mist kept to his heels, as ever. Today, it hung back. Finally, he reached the corner where Abe's curiosities stood. The door hung crooked, splintered, broken. Uzaya went still. Someone had broken in while he was gone. He crossed the distance slowly, scanning the surroundings. He pushed the door open. It scraped across the floor, wood fragments catching. The shelves were bare. Drawers stood open, their contents spilled across the floor. Floorboards had been pried up at the seams and left gaping. Even the hearthstones had been pulled free. He stood listening, expecting something else to reveal itself. Footsteps, voices, nothing. Clearly someone was looking for him, someone who knew of the artifact. He stepped back outside to look around. Across the street, a torn piece of parchment was nailed to a post. Most of it ripped away, but it was still legible. Uzaya, half-breed resident. Reward for information. His stomach tightened. A bounty? He became aware of voices nearby, too close. So I'm walking in. I'm telling you, it was him. 10 gold just for telling the guard? That's where he lives. Look. 3 men stood at the junction in the road. Locals he recognized by sight, but didn't know. One caught his eyes, already backing away. Uzaya went back in to gather what he could. Outside, the voices multiplied. More people drifting closer, louder now. He slipped out through the back door, unseen. Chapter 24. The Awakening. Part 1. Tenbrick's Gate. A fire burned on the high stone at the island's crown, kept more for passing ships than for ceremony. Below it, Thane Orlin kept watch. He had done so for nearly 6 decades. His father had watched before him, his grandfather before that. A lineage of watchers bound to stand vigil, their service unbroken even as its meaning thinned into ritual. They did not question the charge, they kept it. Tenbrick's Gate was a monument with no surviving record of origin. Its purpose argued over in myths no one fully accepted. It had always stood silent. Until 2 nights ago. Wrapped in his heavy cloak against the cold sea wind, Orlin stood at the cliff's edge. Dawn was an hour off, sky still dark. Below, waves broke hard against the rocks and boulders that ringed the island, crashing and collapsing back into the sea. Further out rose a soaring arch of twisted mirror stone, anchored into the bedrock below the surface. The frame was thick and torqued, the stone forged into shape rather than cut, smooth as glass. Tenbrick's Gate. The arch spanned nearly 60 feet across. A deep, omnipresent drone saturated everything, issuing from the gate itself, though exactly where one couldn't determine. The vibration carried through the ground and into his body. Within the open span of the gate, the air wavered faintly at the center, a slight unsteadiness that registered only if you kept your eyes on it. Behind Orlin, his garrison stirred. 6 men, all he had. All the council at Carathalor had thought needed. "Sir?" Merrick stepped closer, young, his helmet a little too big for his head. "It's still doing it." "I can see that," Orlin quipped. Within the open span of the gate, loose spray lifted from the surface of the water, rising briefly at the center before being flung back out. A few scraps of kelp followed, drawn up, spun once, then dropped hard against the rock. It stopped as abruptly as it began. The air within the arch went still again. "What does it mean?" Orlin didn't know how to answer, so said nothing. The gate had been silent since the days of the Storm Kings. No one alive knew how to activate it, or even what it connected to. Orlin's father had kept the oath, and his father before him, a long line of watchers. They preserved the records on the island and performed the rites exactly as they always had. But whatever mandate or authority had once sanctioned the watchers' duties had vanished long ago. The watchers remained, recognized in Carathalor, but reduced to ceremony more than function. Even so, Orlin understood one thing. The portal was stirring. "Get a boat ready," Orlin said. "Fast one. Straight to Eldenport. The Elder Council needs to know." "What should I tell them?" Orlin kept his eyes on the open span of the gate. The faint wavering at its center tightened briefly, then eased again, the bassy drone saturating the air. "Tell them the gate is waking," he said. "Tell them I don't know why. And tell them," he added, "to send someone who does." Merrick left with haste. Orlin remained there for a while, staring up at the ancient arch. He turned back toward the Sanctus Librarium, a squat brick building raised where the watchers kept their records. What little survived of the earliest accounts of the gates was kept here. Shelves held cracked leather folios, rolled diagrams bound with cord, and stone tablets set into shallow niches. Scrolls and early volumes lay sealed in the inner vault, their margins crowded with competing explanations. The oldest texts were spare and restrained, closer to record than story. Later copies grew more elaborate, more speculative, drifting into the fantastical, and had not been opened in years. If there was anything known that still applied, it would be there. Within the open span of Tenbrick's gate, the air began to move again. Not all at once, a shifting near the center. Shadow turned within, depth where there should be none. His watch was ending. Part 2. Caer Thalor. The council chamber in Caer Thalor, capital of Tharn Escar, was built to impress. Vaulted ceilings rose above stained glass windows and crystal fixtures, satin curtains softening the stone. At its center stood a table of ancient oak, broad enough to seat 30, dominating the space by sheer presence alone. 12 counselors sat around it, representing the 12 districts. Baltus stood at the head of the table, reviewing reports with the enthusiasm of a man reading a grain inventory. Gray hair, gray robes, gray everything. Decades of bureaucracy had leached the color from him. Item 7, he intoned. Eldenport requests emergency funding for infrastructure repair. Sinkholes in the Low District. Again? Councillor Thrace barely looked up as he waved a dismissive hand. Those in Eldenport are fond of this tactic, exaggerating their damages to extract our gold. Eldenport sits on water near a swamp. Of course, things sink. Deny it, Councillor Thrace concluded. The report mentions casualties. There's always casualties, Thrace scoffed. Murmurs of agreement around the table. Baltus paused. There is one additional matter. 2 nights ago, a seismic event was reported across multiple provinces. It was felt here, as you're aware, in Eldenport, and as far north as Holford. Silence. What kind of earthquake hits everywhere at once? Councillor Mara asked. Not an earthquake, said a voice from the far end of the table. Everyone turned. Councillor Vess, old, thin, draped in a flowing purple robe with gold accents. He rarely spoke. Vess was one of the realm's most famous historians, but granted little respect at this table. Everyone had forgotten he was even there. Explain, Baltus said. Vess stood slowly. Earthquakes propagate. They have epicenters. This was felt simultaneously. No delay at all. Harmonic alignment can do this. Something deep activating across a linked network. Thrace rolled his eyes. I see. We blame ancient magic. Nonsense. I'm talking about what we built our cities on, Vess said. Veilguard engineering. The technology used when Tharn Escar spanned the upper and the lower realms. It's been dormant for millennia. What if it's not anymore? What if, Mara mocked. You sound like a street prophet. Something is waking beneath us. Enough, Baltus cut in. This council deals in facts, not speculation. We'll commission an investigative committee, or a survey. We'll meet again in 4 weeks. 4 weeks? Vess stared. You felt the tremor, and you want to wait a month? We follow procedure. Procedure won't matter if... This session is adjourned, Baltus interjected. He gathered the papers before him and left. The other counselors stood, stretching, already discussing lunch plans and tax disputes. Vess remained seated, alone at the table. He looked around the chamber. Ancient stonework. Dwarven craft, precise in every joint. Built by hands that no longer dwelt on the surface, maintained by humans who had never learned the techniques or bothered to know the history. We have closed our minds to their existence. We have built our kingdom on their bones. Drow built foundations at their feet. Elven archives burned. Dwarven fortresses claimed and repurposed. And now the makers were returning, and no one in these chambers understood how any of it worked. Vess had read the texts. studied the fragmentary records more deeply than anyone still alive. If those systems reactivated, what then? No one was listening. By the time anyone did, it would be too late. Part 3. The Exodus. The Crucible Vault occupied an entire city block, the largest structure in Eldenport. 7 stories of cream-colored stone rose from foundations of black mirror glass. 4 corner towers anchored the complex, each crowned with copper domes weathered to a muted green. Between them, tiered terraces stepped downward in measured bands, forming gardens where rare herbs grew under careful arcane cultivation. The carved stone face of the founder dominated the crucible's entrance, 60 feet of weathered granite staring down at the plaza below, expression frozen between judgment and warning. His beard flowed into the architectural relief work, merging with interlocking planes that stepped inward to frame the massive arched doorway beneath. Above, carved into the central facade between the 3rd and 4th floors, an inscription in 3 languages: knowledge preserved, order maintained, corruption denied. 4 entrances serve the Crucible's functions: the Founder's Gate for council business, the Archive Portico for scholars, the Eastern Service entry beneath the Forge Wing, and a southern vault door of black iron where dangerous relics entered and rarely left. A district away, in the Outer Hollows, rose the black towers of the Arcanum. 9 centuries old and proud of it, those who taught there resented everything the Crucible represented. The Crucible watched them with severe institutional prejudice. They suspected their crooked towers were places to practice conjuration and the summoning arts. The Arcanum resented the scrutiny. The Crucible didn't care. Eldenport's central plaza should have been bustling with midday commerce. Instead, half the market stalls stood empty. Wagon traffic had thinned to a trickle. Those who remained moved with hurried purpose, eyes down, conversations clipped. 3 prominent merchant families had left the city entirely in the last week. 2 more had closed their warehouses indefinitely. The harbor master reported 7 ships departing early, cargo holds half empty, captains citing unfavorable conditions. The northern roads were cut off. Undead had been sighted gathering along the edges of the quagmire. Villages nearest the marsh had already begun to empty, and no one was willing to test the roads beyond that. Sea routes were the safest way out. Those with modest means fled north to Brinehand Bay, paying whatever the pirates demanded. Those with real wealth paid more still for southern passage to warmer ports. The city was bleeding gold, confidence, and people. Part 4. The Contingency. Deep within the Crucible Vault, through the Founder's Gate, the passage climbed. Broad marble stairs rose in slow tiers, each ascent measured and ceremonial, forcing each step to acknowledge the height gained. Walls thickened. Light softened through crystal insets along the upper walls, stripped of brilliance. By the time the council chamber was reached, the city felt distant, reduced to something held below. The chamber crowned the ascent. Vaulted ceilings arched overhead, stone ribs locked together with impossible precision. Stained glass lined the upper walls, finer than any in Eldenport's churches. Not devotional, declarative. At its center was an oblong table of polished obsidian, black as the foundations below, reflecting the faces of those who sat around it. 7 exhausted elders gathered there now, wearing formal robes of deep blue with silver trim. Elder Castle spoke first. White hair cropped close to the skull, sharp eyes set in a face worn thin by command. He carried himself with the quiet authority of a man shaped by decades of military service. discipline so ingrained it no longer needed display. Let's begin with the drowned quarter. Captain Tormund? The guard captain stepped forward. Promoted after his predecessor was lost in a quagmire incident, he looked as though the post had aged him faster than the years had. Dark circles sagged beneath his eyes. He placed a leather folder on the table. 3 sinkholes in 48 hours, Tormund said. His voice stayed level. Tanner's Row, 12 dead, 23 injured. Fisherman's Wharf, no casualties, but 30% of the docking capacity is gone. Salvage Street, we recovered 2 bodies. He hesitated, then continued. The third was heard screaming for nearly an hour. Then it stopped. He flipped a page. Castle folded his hands on the table. Captain, stick to what you can prove. Tormund swallowed. Prove? The word came out sharp. The sinkholes are spreading. The sounds are getting louder. Things are gathering in the quagmire. People are dying while we argue over whether it fits precedent. Breslin snorted. Precedent exists for a reason. So do warning signs, Tormund shot back. We've already ignored them, to our loss. 3 watch posts vanished beneath us, and we told ourselves it was the weather. Yana's rings clicked softly. You're suggesting a cause beyond erosion? I'm suggesting there's something below us. Silence. Thicker this time. Castle's gaze never left Tormund. Doing what? It's a pattern, Tormund said. The sound doesn't wander. Breslin pushed back in his chair. Old tunnels, empty space. You hear echoes and your mind fills in the rest. Then send engineers, Tormund said. Let someone look. Castle nodded once. We will. Relief flashed across Tormund's face. Didn't last. After we've addressed the quagmire perimeter, Castle continued, we can't pull forces from the gates. Tormund waited for a reaction from the others. Anything. The matter of the quagmire, Tormund continued. There are husks, dead people. They're moving in groups, large clusters gathering along the marsh edge, always a little closer each week. Routes used last month are no longer passable. 2 patrols went in, neither came back. Elder Maris waved her hand away. How many? It's hard to say. Possibly hundreds. The fog never lifts. Whatever's out there stays hidden in it. The spiral gathers them, Maris replied lightly, like debris in a current. This isn't driftwood, Tormund said sarcastically. They're organized. We've all seen it. Or, Elder Breslin said carefully, you're seeing patterns where none exist. Tormund's jaw clenched. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, Captain, Breslin said. You're describing symptoms. What's the actual threat? You felt the tremor 2 nights ago, Tormund said. Silence. Elder Myris frowned. That is unusual. Castle folded his hands. Let me offer perspective, Captain. The city is experiencing seismic instability. The quagmire expands seasonally. Corrupted creatures have always gathered where the spiral is strong. Sinkholes in the quarter. Nothing new. It's built on sinking ground. A coordinated threat across multiple provinces would be unprecedented, and this council cannot act on that assumption. The precedent is in your archives, Tormund said. The foundation of the crucible is your precedent. Elder Maris shook her head. Fairy tales. Enough, Castle said, his hand lifting toward the window. We've already lost merchant families to panic. Half the market district sits empty because rumors spread faster than facts. He met Tormund's eyes. A public declaration makes it worse. Evacuation means collapse. No gods, no governance, no defense. We hold order with who remains, or we lose the city, whether the threat is real or not. Elder Yana spoke quietly. But if the captain is right, then we act when the threat is undeniable, not before. They're already leaving, Tormund said. We will not sacrifice the city to fear. Tormund stared at him, eyes glaring. You're asking me to wait until it's too late. Your duty is to prevent panic, Castle said. Mine is to decide when it can no longer be prevented. Elder Myris shifted in her seat, her expression tightening, but said nothing. Castle looked around the table. Is there anything else? Elder Thylin spoke without hesitation. The half-drow in the drowned quarter, Uzaya. Castle turned to her. Explain. He came to the crucible seeking entry, Thylin said. He used a Veilguard pendant as leverage. Fourth Age construction. Active bonding was verified. I examined it and returned it to him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. You returned an active Veilguard artifact? Elder Breslin asked. He is the bonded bearer, Thylin said. Severing that bond would have been dangerous. She turned to Tormund. Captain, where was this man during the incidents? Tormund flipped through his folder. Witnesses place him near Tanner's Row the day before the sinkhole. He was seen at Fisherman's Wharf the morning of the collapse. Circumstantial, Elder Myris said. Proximity alone is circumstantial, Thylin replied. But combined with an active Veilguard artifact, it cannot be dismissed. If the pendant is awake and the ground fails in his wake, the connection cannot be ignored. Cause or catalyst, I cannot say. Castle folded his hands. Possession of a Veilguard artifact without council authorization is illegal. He has no standing authorization, Thylin said. Then we bring him in for questioning. Carefully. Bonded artifacts defend their bearers. Containment must reflect that. Silence. The quarter calls him the Mistwalker, Tormund added. Superstition, Maris muttered. Castle studied Thylin. Your assessment. Is he a threat to the city? Thylin paused. The pendant accepted him. It's active. Such things only activate when something has failed. Balance. When something must change. Or be stopped, Castle said. Thylin inclined her head. Possibly. Captain Tormund will have authorization to summon the Ordained. They will take him into custody and bring in here. The room went quiet. If the artifact proves dangerous, they are best equipped to deal with the situation. Castle met Tormund's eyes. Preferably alive, but the city's safety takes precedence. Tormund stopped at the end of the table. We sent word to the Arcanum 2 days ago for support at the wall. No answer. Castle didn't look up. He folded the parchment before him. We cannot compel them, so we plan around what we command. Several elders shifted uncomfortably. Then we are done. Chairs scraped back. Elders rose, voices already dropping as they turned away to other matters. Taxes, shipping delays, personal disputes that could be endlessly argued. Tormund gathered his things, but did not leave with the others. Elder Myris lingered as well, crossing to him as the chamber emptied. Off the record, she said quietly. I believe you, but panic destroys cities as surely as an invasion. We just need more time. We may not have it, Tormund said. Myris glanced toward the empty space where Castle had sat at the head of the table. Some truths cannot be acknowledged until they can be contained, she said. That is the shape of power. It does not change because it should. She touched his arm briefly, then turned away. Tormund remained a moment longer, looking at the empty chairs.